Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Great Bear Resources Geological Model webinar. This call is being recorded and it's on Monday, November 30th, 2020. So I'd like to now turn the conference over to Mr. Knox Henderson, Investor Relations. Please go ahead, Knox.
Thank you, Rita. I'd like to welcome everyone to the call today. Today, the company will be providing insight into the geological model of the Dixie Project in Red Lake, Ontario. With me today are Chris Taylor, Great Bear's President and CEO, and Bob Singh, the company's Vice President of Exploration. Following our presentation, there will be an opportunity for analysts to ask questions. Comments made on the call today will contain certain forward-looking information. This information, by its nature, is subject to risk and uncertainties, and actual results may differ materially from the views expressed today. For further information on these risks and uncertainties, please see Great Bear's relevant filings on SEDAR. We'll now turn the call over to Chris and Bob.
Good morning, Knox. Good morning, Rita.
Chris.
And good morning, Bob. How are you doing this morning, Bob?
Bob's mic is off. There you are. There you are, Bob.
Okay.
Good morning. I'm doing well. Thank you.
Good. So everybody, thanks for tuning in. We've spent, in a way, months, perhaps you could say years, preparing some of the information that we're rolling out today. It's been a very good year for us in 2020, as many of you as shareholders will certainly know. But we're going to capture, I think, the theme of the Dixie Project. We're going to make some statements here that should be useful in the future for understanding the nature of the system, sort of the potential size, sort of the key characteristics that set this discovery apart from many others in the industry. So without further ado, I'm going to jump in here and run you through a few slides of my own. These were prepared by myself and Callum Morrison, our VP Corporate Development. And after that, we'll segue into the much more interesting and more detailed view of the culmination of all the work that we've done so far in the steady and competent hands of Bob Singh. So just without being able to click through on my slides, here we go. Going to make some forward-looking statements. So some of the key takeaways from this presentation today are going to be a review of what we've done in the year to date, and of course, the geological model. So, just to recap a little bit here, Great Bear has approximately doubled in size this year. So the market cap and the share price have both approximately doubled over the course of 2020, or the last 12 months anyway. We're on track, surprisingly, given the fact that we're sitting in the middle of a global pandemic. Our hats go off to the Romini geologists that we have in Red Lake, who continue to competently and efficiently operate the project. So they've managed to keep the drills spinning, and we're right on track where we thought we would be, pretty much, despite the fact that we have the COVID-19 situation. I have to say, we've managed to do that without anybody getting infected on any of our staff, which is quite an achievement here. So what really sets apart our current understanding is that right now in 2020, getting to the end of 2020, we have a much better grasp of the scope and consistency, and especially the high-grade distributions that are characteristic of the LP fault and the other zones at the Dixie Project. So this has improved substantially since just a year ago. So right now, and you'll see it in the modeling work that Bob's going to unveil, the continuity and size of the gold zones at the Dixie Project, particularly the LP fault, these are not typical of a Red Lake gold deposit. So this is something new to the area. We now have hundreds of drill holes which show that this is the case. So we have a density, a plethora of data that show that that's effectively something new to the district. And of course, if you've been following the news, you've seen that over the course of the year we've added some very competent people to our board of directors, particularly Mike Kenyon and Paula Rogers. We'll touch on that a little bit later. And what we've done in the meantime is we've witnessed a bit of a convergence. And, in a new discovery, you rarely see a consensus emerge in the early days of drilling. But right now, over the course of the year, we've seen our analyst coverage increase from 2 to 6 professionals. And we've seen this consensus emerging that we have the potential for what looks to be a tier 1 type gold asset here at the Dixie Project. And, going over to the other part of the presentation here, Bob is going to go over this in detail. I'm just going to touch on it quickly. But again, this geological model is a culmination of 4 years of work on the project. We started drilling in 2017. We're just about all the way through 2020. So we have hundreds of drill holes that are now informing our understanding of the project. So we can now give you a pretty good idea what the gold controls and endowment are going to look like for the Dixie portion of the Red Lake Greenstone Belt. And one of the things that we're very proud of, and I've never seen this done more effectively than by Bob and the team in Red Lake, is that the targeted drilling that we're doing, and you saw some of this in our news release. We just put out news less than a week ago now, and this was continuous hits of high-grade mineralization along, I think it was about a kilometer of the LP fault. And it's interesting because those drill holes were completed in these big gaps anywhere between about 40 to 150 meters that had not been drilled before. And what we're seeing is that we keep hitting the gold in these big gaps where we haven't previously drilled. So what that shows you is that the model that Bob is unrolling here is definitely working. And it's really, as I said, increasingly apparent from the work that we're doing that we have the geological framework in place that is consistent with the Tier 1 Gold Project. We'll talk about what that means later. So we will be rolling out this model publicly over the next few days as well. We're just getting some of our ducks in a row on that side. So what you're going to be able to do within a number of days here is look at this and spin it around for yourself. So in a sense, you can think of today's presentation as a bit of a preview. So I was having a chat with Callum about this, and what we see in the industry these days is that perhaps this Tier 1 appellation is becoming one of the more overused designations in the industry. And I think if you think about global gold mining as a whole, Callum put together this list, which I think bears some thought. So really right now, we think there's only 17 Tier 1 gold mines operating in the world in total. And there's potentially another 13 for a total of 30 that could be Tier 1, but they sort of miss the mark generally in terms, just slightly, in terms of size or reserve life, other factors. So what are the definitions of Tier 1? If you talk to Barrick, they'll talk about a mine life with a stated life in excess of 10 years, an annual production of at least 500,000 ounces of gold, and total cash costs that are in the lower half of the industry cost curve. So you can see, looking at the Tier 1 asset list that we have here on the right side of the screen, you look at these reserve lives, and sorry, I have to write on a vertical surface here. You look at the all-in sustaining costs, and you look at these annual production figures, and these are the backbones of the gold mining industry globally. So you can see some of these major deposits. I'm sure we're familiar with these as members of the industry. It's a bit like memorizing the statistics for your favorite sports team. Close to being Tier 1 mines, these are the ones that just about make it. You can look at some of the key ones in Canada, Detour Lake, or you can look over here at Canadian Malartic. So these are large annual production. In the case of Detour Lake, you can see that this has over a 25-year reserve life ahead of it, and it just kind of misses out on the Tier 1 status just because of the all-in sustaining costs. But arguably, this is a Tier 1 asset, and these are two major Tier 1 assets in Canada, Canadian Malartic and Detour Lake. So what we're going to argue and what we're going to talk about here in the presentation is how we think that what Great Bear is looking at with the Dixie Project is an emerging, this is the early days of a Tier 1 type gold discovery. And the implications of that are pretty profound. So recapping the Dixie Project, most of you are probably familiar with it, but for those that aren't, we're describing this as potentially a Tier 1 gold discovery, but clearly in a Tier 1 jurisdiction. So if you look at this map, you're looking at more than 30 million ounces of gold production to date. And when you're looking at the Dixie Project, what you're looking at is about 22 kilometers long from tip to tip. You're looking at something that clearly has district scale potential. More importantly, that covers a single target that extends over the length of the project, the LP fault, and a number of satellite zones that occur beside that. So you're looking at something that is not just land. This is land that we put together over the top of a very large target that cuts through this area. So clearly a tier 1 jurisdiction. What sets our project aside from many, many projects in the space is the fact that this is really almost an optimal arrangement of a project infrastructure package. And what you're looking at here is Highway 105. This runs parallel to the claims. In fact, everywhere that we're drilling, we're within about 2 kilometers of the paved highway and the power line. This is the power line that feeds power to the other operations and the community in this area. And of course, there's a natural gas line running along the highway as well. So the focus of today's presentation is really going to be technical. So just pay attention to a lot of the stuff that Bob says. I think it's fascinating. I've been looking at it emerge steadily over a number of months and especially over the last few weeks. But we'll talk about a little bit of the progress of the company first. So I wanted to highlight on a single slide what the year looked like for Great Bear. And when you look at this, you start off over here, year to date, share price in the $8 to $9 range. And here we are sitting around the $17 range. More importantly, though, is the amount of drilling that we've put out here. So I think to date, we have about 120 holes that we've released that were completed in 2020 and have been put forward. So I thought what I'd want to do here is just capture some of the highlight intervals. And again, the transition is being made from the company as sort of an early stage explorer to what we view as a premier gold development company. But this is the basis for that growth. It's really the proof in the drilling. So if you look at the progress of the year, of course, at the beginning of the year, we announced that we were going to do our 2% NSR spinout to our shareholders. That was approved around the end of April. Of course, that's gone through now. We'll be talking about that in the future, but there was a very, very, very large interest in the rights offering that we just did on that. I guess you'll see the numbers announced on that side shortly, but it was absolutely massively oversubscribed. So what you're going to be looking at, though, here on this graphic is these kind of results. So LP fault drilling, 10.5 grams over 21 meters. The LP fault gold drilled in every hole over 11 kilometers. The high grade, we started to see this consistently emerge. High grade, 42.7 grams over 3 meters within 4 grams over 52 meters. The Dixie limb zone, we drilled it down to 800 meters depth. We hit 10 grams over 19 meters there. LP fault, just over half an ounce over 13 meters within 104 meters of 2.7 grams. We completed our last placement, $33 million at about 17 bucks. We signed a definitive long-term exploration agreement with our First Nations partners around the middle of the year. More drilling from the LP fault, an ounce over 12.4 meters, and then followed up a few days later with an ounce over 20.55 meters. We had a number of people think that this was the same news release. In fact, it was 2 different news releases with a number of different holes showing that we have shallow, significant intervals of high-grade mineralization. We found a new zone on the property, the Arrow Zone. It was about 2/3 of an ounce over a couple meters in the first drill hole. There's more work that's going to be undertaken there. LP fault drilling, 10 grams over 31 meters. LP fault drilling, I think that's a cut and paste error. Sorry about that. LP fault drilling, 81.2 grams over 10 meters. This is really important because that's at 0 meters depth. LP fault drilling here, 32 grams over 8 meters within 8 grams over 37. Really shallow LP fault drilling, 3 grams over 63 meters. At this point in time, around the beginning of October, we completed 100,000 meters of drilling, 180 holes. We're now up to 198 on the LP fault, and some of the highlight numbers over half an ounce over just about 20 meters. And here, some of the more recent news, all 4.5 grams over 100 meters, and very good gold recoveries at the hinge zone. And you can see here, middle of the year, the addition of Mike Kenyon to the board of directors. And you can see here the nomination of Paula Rogers to our board of directors. So all in all, a very, very successful year, very productive time. So I think one of the factors that sets us aside as a company from others in the space, and this is a function of our infrastructure access and also our attitude towards expenditures, is over 90% of the capital that we've deployed in total in the company has been spent on drilling and exploration. I think that's about 92% roughly. So basically, almost all the money that we raise gets put right in the ground. So this means effectively, with about $30 million spent on the project so far, we've got an over $900 million market cap, and that's about $30 of market cap generated for every dollar that we've spent in the ground. So at the moment on the property, there's almost 250,000 meters of drilling, of which about 70% of Great Bear is Great Bear. Now, why do we have to have so many holes? Because we have a very big system that we're following here. So that'll be very obvious when you're looking at the models with Bob. That equates to about 600 drill holes, of which 419 were completed by Great Bear. There's another 67 holes that we've been able to verify in the historical database that we'd be comfortable using in our own modeling work. And so far this year, there's 121 drill holes released by Great Bear. That equates to 74,018 meters released so far. There's quite a few additional drill holes that have been completed. Those are coming as soon as the assay labs allow. And over the course of the year, despite the pandemic, we've managed to maintain 3 to 5 drill rigs over the entire time. So hats off, absolutely hats off to our staff in Red Lake. These guys really know how to get things done. And of course, the drilling at this project continues year round. So why are we doing this drilling? Like what is the point of all this work? Well, this is really to define in our minds, and these are bold statements, but we want to deliver one of the fastest and most cost-efficient Tier 1 NI 43-101 compliant inferred/indicated maiden resources of recent years. And we want to do that in less than 3 years of the LP fault discovery. And you got to think, right now we're just over a year and a half, getting closer to 2 years in that discovery. We think that resource level drilling is going to be done next year, at which point we start putting the studies together. Bob's going to give you a very good idea how that's likely to deploy here. But some of the statistics, what this could look like when you look at that. So the LP fault, our big target, we're going to have that drilling done from surface to about 400 meters depth, roughly on average. In future, we're going to have the LP fault drilled down to 700 or 800 vertical meters. So there are deeper drill holes planned, which are coming in the near future, and we steadily work our way down. That drilling will occur over about 4,000 to 5,000 meters of strike length. The approximate drill hole spacing is going to vary from about 35 meters to about 100 meters. That's a function of what we need for the geostatistics, given the high degree of continuity and the size of the zone. And what are the key features that we see? Well, high grade, of course, we'll discuss that within this mid to low grade disseminated halo. Of course, this is a mesothermal disseminated and high grade gold model. One of the key deposits that this looks a lot like is Hemlo. Sorry, I'm writing all over the name there. We have a number of people working with us and looking at the company that have good exposure to Hemlo. One of them is the Analyst that one of Dave Talbot that we'll talk about a bit later here. So people that have seen Hemlo core see very strong similarities to what we're looking at the LP fault. Of course, the hinge zone, our Red Lake style gold zone, one of them, we'll have that drilled down to about 500 vertical meters. We've already got this drilled down to roughly about 800 vertical meters, so we'll go a bit deeper on that in the near future as well. The strike length is about 500 meters. Your drill hole spacing as a Red Lake type deposit is somewhere of 10 to 25 meters on average. It's obviously high grade, vein controlled, and it's a mesothermal gold system. The Dixie limb, it's immediately adjacent to the hinge, about the same depths that we plan. We've already got that down to about 800 meters. That's going to be a little bit deeper in the future. And then the strike length here, sorry, I was talking about the limb when I mentioned this drill depth previously. The strike length that we're looking at there on the Dixie limb is about 400 meters, and the drill hole spacing is about 10 to 35 meters. So similarly, high grade veins, stratigraphically controlled. It's a mesothermal vein / replacement system. Both these zones are very much like the Red Lake gold mine, which is why I often swap the names of them in my mind. So one of the key characteristics of what we're looking at on the project is that some of the project is a lot like what else is discovered and has been drilled and is in production in Red Lake. And of course, the LP fault is totally unlike those discoveries, other than the fact that it has a great deal of free gold and very good gold recoveries, as we've alluded to in recent metallurgical news. But if we look at what we have at, say, Evolution's Red Lake mine, generally you're looking at long hole stoping of about 2.5 to 6 meters in width, cut and fill of about 4 meters to 6 meters in width. Another great deposit that's going into production in the near term, I'm sure, Battle North, this Bateman project. So generally you're looking at about 8.5 meters long hole stoping widths. About half of that is ore. Uppers in the long hole, sorry, pardon me. We'll get a sip of tea here in a sec. This is about 5.5 meters average width, about 23% ore. Pure gold's going to production. They should be looking at their first pour shortly. So I think based on their public disclosures, we're looking at about 2 meters to 6 meters at about 75% ore on the cut and fill, and long hole stoping about 25% ore on a 2 meter to 6 meter sense. What this is telling you is in Red Lake, generally, you're looking at gold zones that are these vein-like systems, and they're generally about 2 meters wide is the average kind of width of mineralization. Can vary down to the width of your hand up to several meters, but it's going to average about 2 meters, and your mining widths are going to be a couple meters at least, because that's the width of your equipment. What we're looking at in contrast is something like the LP fault, and these bars are to scale. So 2 meters to 6 meters. And you're looking at a zone here, which is up to 100 meters wide. You can look at some of the numbers that we put out recently, like 100 meters of 4.69 grams, for instance. So the other zones that we have, the hinge zone and the limb zone, those are very similar to what else you see in Red Lake. And of course, the LP fault zone is completely different. So it's clear looking at this data, we'd be blind to ignore the potential that the LP fault in the Dixie Project, it definitely has potential to have bulk mining applied to it, which is really something that you don't see elsewhere in the area. And now I'm going to have that overdue sip of tea. Just give me a sec. So I put together a graphic here showing you what underground mining looks like in Red Lake. This is a photo that I took from, I think, the community town site, sort of a virtual museum. So you can see you're going to have a face, a development face that's sort of generally 2 or 3 meters wide, sometimes up to 8 meters wide. What you're looking at here on the right is some of these are like internal graphics that we do when we're looking at some of the results. So you can see here, this is a close in zoom in off the LP fault, but you can see here the difference. This is 200 meters. So I tried to eyeball roughly the width of the previous picture into the scale of this cross section. So you can see here we'd have an ounce over 4.25 meters. That would be within this wider bracket of 7.26 grams over 53 meters. And then you'd have, say, 108 grams over a couple meters, 10 grams over 0.75, an ounce over 5.75 meters, 20 grams over 2.75 meters. If you're in a Red Lake type environment, you'd be very, very happy with these kind of intervals, because what you're looking at is predictable panels of high-grade gold mineralization that you can hit on multiple drill holes on multiple sections as you look at that. So, but what you're looking at, which is totally unusual, is that continuous mineralization that occurs around them. And when you're looking at that, it's these wide intervals of grade, in fact, that are extremely unusual. So 7 grams over 53, a gram over 26. Here's that drill hole that we just put out. So that's 108 grams that is 4.7 grams over 101 meters. So when you're looking at this, the red indicates where we've hit gold mineralization. You can see that there is no spot that's wider than 3 meters of zero grade within that. So that is continuously mineralized over that interval length. So that's extremely exceptional. And this is surface. So I could be walking around on the top here and doing some prospecting work. Mostly I'd be looking at a couple meters of gravel on top of this, which is why it's still here all these years later. And of course, if I had a shovel, I could dig down and I could expose these high-grade zones right at bedrock surface, which of course we have done with some of our drilling. When you're looking at that context inside of the scope of the system, this is about 600 meters. And what we see as we go deeper is that we get multiple gold zones developed over a wider interval. And generally, the deeper we go, the wider it gets. So we're going from the usual Red Lake type mining scenario up to what we're looking at the LP fault, which really, quite frankly, doesn't have parallels in the district as far as we understand. And to take that up to the next level, this is something that Bob and I struggled with in the early discovery, how to explain this. So here's what we were just showing. So here's your kind of 600-meter width on the system. And here's how that nests within the total mineralized envelope. So as you can see here, if you take a drill hole and you drill it at any point along the middle few kilometers of the LP fault, and you do drill holes like this, you're going to hit the LP fault, and you're going to hit the Dixie limb, and you're going to hit the hinge zone. We've only drilled this over a small area so far, but in the future, more of that work has to be done. It defines a 1,400-meter wide envelope where you're getting multiple gold zones. So really, this is a wide dilatant corridor that's filled with different styles of mineralization. And generally, as I've said before, we tend to increase the number of zones and the width of zones as we go down to depth. Obviously, we need to do more testing on that as well. But this scale of mineralization is something that is unprecedented for this area. And this is what it looks like. And Bob's going to show you this in 3D. And when you look at these drill sections, you can see how it's drilled, and we can see that basically because the drill holes are going this way, we don't have any drilling down below that level in the zone. You will have deeper drilling in the footwall. That's just the angle of drilling. And you can see that we talk about a 5-kilometer area all the time where we're doing our grid drill program. But of course, we've actually drilled this over a bigger area. Bob's just cut this off based on what he could put on the screen. But we've actually drilled that off for about 11 kilometers now, where we see gold coming out in the drill core. So what's this led to over the last little while? It's led to a consensus emerging of the tier 1 potential of the project. And these are all great quotes from some of our analysts. I have to say right off the bat that there is additional coverage from Stifel, GMP. They are doing an internal review of the work. And I believe there's a new analyst coming on file there after some changes they made this summer. But these are the ones that have current research out on the company. So that's why we've put them up. But you can look at the quotes and you can look at the price targets, and generally you're looking at a projection based on that tier 1 potential of anywhere from the $20 range to the mid $30 range based on that understanding. So just to pick a couple of the quotes, given the parameters here, Alex at CIBC talking about given the parameters of a tier 1 asset, which we were looking at before, the LP fault zone represents a major discovery that could command attention from growth-hungry producers. Cormark, Stefan here, there's arguably no comparison to the LP fault scale potential, even relative to other large world-class examples. PI Financial, this is Phil talking here. Great Bear continues to demonstrate high-grade continuity along the LP fault, where they've also had a 100% hit rate on the gold mineralization. We've got Kevin. I used to work with Kevin back several years ago at Imperial Metals. Know him quite well. Local infill drilling along the LP fault zone increasingly illustrates the zone's sectional continuity of high-grade mineralization. That's a recent note that Kevin put out. And Dave Talbot, somebody who's worked at Hemlo, knows it quite well. We don't believe many realize the emerging critical mass of the Dixie deposits or how well they correlate to the Red Lake and Hemlo, 2 world-class gold districts. So very, very bullish statements and obviously very attractive price targets. So our question here is really, what are tier 1 assets worth? And what we can see here is a list of various tier 1 assets. This is from the list on the previous page. And generally, these things are worth in the billions of dollars. So we're looking at here some examples. Those of you, about 10 years ago, you might remember Cerro Negro. Of course, we mentioned Canadian Malarctic. And of course, we mentioned Detour Lake. I personally thought it was a great acquisition on Kirkland's part to take over the Detour Lake deposit, given the very long reserve life that we see there. Obviously, our director, Mike Kenyon, has some very, very good familiarity with that as well. We can think here, with what we're going to present, and I'm going to get off the mic here and let Bob do the talking. But what are we going to see in 2021? Well, effectively, we're going to continue that growth from being a top explorer to a top developer. We've instituted some board changes. There's going to be changes to management, additions to the technical team, basically expansion and growth along the lines of what you would expect for a company in our position. Next year, we estimate a similar $21 million minimum budget to what we have this year. We're going to be releasing more metallurgy tests over the course of the year. First ones from the Hinge Zone came back 97% recoveries. We would expect very, very good recoveries from the other zones as well because they're dominated by free gold. We're going to expose more of the LP faulted surface. As I was drawing the cartoon, basically showing that we can basically stand right on top of the layer of gravel that covers it and expose it. This is some of the lower grade halo that occurs adjacent to the high grade zone. So this is the kind of stuff we did manage to strip off last year. Obviously, there'll be more of that type of work going on in 2021. We're going to do regional exploration across our other portfolio of projects. I won't talk about too much of that now, but you'll see news coming up when it's ready. And we're going to complete that maiden resource definition drilling next year. And of course, we're going to work towards that resource publication towards the end of the year. And with that, I'll step aside and we'll let the more interesting work come through from Bob here. So thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Chris. Just need to switch the share. Thank you. Good. Thanks for the introduction, Chris. I'm going to start walking us through the geology and really talk about how we're going to start at the big picture of what we think is going on at Dixie, what we believe the mineralization looks like, and then drill down into the details of what we've done, what the model looks like, what we've come up with, and how we believe this is going to move down the road over our next year or a couple of years of drilling as we ultimately get to the goal of resource. The project itself is in an isolated greenstone belt. It's part of the larger Red Lake greenstone belt or the Bertucci greenstone belt, but there are some significant differences about Dixie that we've learned over time that really wasn't talked about early on in the project's history. And so one of the big things that we've noticed on the project are the rocks. The rocks are obviously mafic volcanic rocks. They have similarities to the older rocks in the district, but we've also determined from our core relationships, oriented core data, Younging directions. And on the Dixie project, everything gets younger away from the core of the property. We have a fold and we have some evidence of data younging away from us. So the rocks are actually younger than the than the Confederation age. The classical thinking in Red Lake is everything from the Red Lake mine to the south gets younger. Dixie sort of juxtaposes that age direction. And the reason why it's important to us is to understand that there is an older, unique greenstone belt here at Dixie that doesn't fit with the regional model. It doesn't fit with the classical thinking about the project and the district in general. It's why we originally acquired the project, because there was something unique about it that didn't fit the models. And so when we look at the detailed geology of the project itself, this is a culmination of several years of work. Some of it, most of it's based on drilling because there's very little exposures. We use geophysics heavily to help interpret things along strike. What we've identified are major changes in rock types, big geological structures, and we've also identified it with geophysics, just the ability to map these things out. And the most important thing that we've done with this model is we've drilled fences because we had drills and we had extra ability to work. We've drilled fences across certain parts of this key areas of the zone that allow us to develop a geological model. And it's not always done at the junior exploration stage. It's not always something that's a priority because obviously you want to hit gold. And that's our primary focus is to drill for gold. However, these types of fences do help a lot in building the geological model, building the understanding. We were just fortunate enough that they still intersected gold mineralization, which was an added bonus to them. But they were primarily designed to help to develop the geological model. And when we look at the property in general, there's a bulk sort of a geology, a regional coarse scale geology. We have a deformation zone, we have folded terrains, and there's a separation of those two sort of domains, if you will. And the big question is, what is the LP fault? And it's been used a lot by us. We obviously named it after the seismic work that was done, LP for lithoprobe. And the work was done back in 2006. The paper was written in 2006. The work was done prior to that. And it was recognized as a large feature in the seismic work that extended to plus 12 kilometers in depth. And for the technical people on the call, you know, the line of the structure is here, and it clearly crosses fabrics. It crosses earlier folding. So the idea with this fault, it was active early in deformation, and then it remained active subsequent to deformation, either bringing fluids or creating more deformation, moving things around, remelting, you know, remobilizing mineralization across it. There's also a strain gradient on the property. We actually enter into amphibolite grade metamorphism from green schist metamorphism, and so there is a strain gradient associated with it. It is a fairly big structure, and when we look at how it occurs on the property, this is a very simplified geology with green rocks and yellow rocks, mafic rocks and felsic volcanic rocks, with the structure crossing through the property. And the red dots that you see here are gold samples from drilling. The idea is that this fault crosses favorable contacts, stratigraphic host rocks, chemically receptive host rocks, and it's not always going to be mineralized along its strike length, because it may cross into rocks that are just too tight. They don't crack enough. They don't have the right chemistry, for example. Where it does cross the property, in the best case scenario for Great Bear, is it crosses through part of the geology and it's parallel. It's parallel to the geology, and it really works out well when you look at it down from a top viewpoint. And in the view that you're looking at here, we're looking down at it, and the biggest opening, if you will, of on the property of geology is right in the middle of the property. It's right where most of that thick LP mineralization occurs. It's also very close to where the hinge and limb zones occur. We have drilled this along strike, and you can even see there's little bits of drill holes off the end here that have some gold in them. But we're really focused on this middle part here because we see this as a big dilation zone, a big opening area where fluids moved in freely. There was a contact zone that was parallel to the fault zone, and it was a real favorable environment for gold mineralization. And you want to really pay attention to that view that I just had on the screen there, because it does tell you that there's a big system at play here with the scale of the project. And when you zoom into it, you can see, for clarity, I've just created some openings, just some artificial openings of the D2 axial plane, the fold nose, the contact at the hinge and the limb zone, just to show what that mineralization looks like proximal to these areas. And of course, this one that stands out the most is the LP fault on the right here, where you have this bigger opening and just a higher distribution of overall gold content inside of that. Smaller openings like the hinge and the limb zones create incredibly high grades over very narrow widths. Whereas at the LP fault zone, we have this much larger thickness of mineralization due to the fact that it was just a bigger and more open system. And I want to talk through possibly how these fluids moved and what we believe happened, and how can this mineralization occur the way that it has occurred. And this is a cross-section view that shows that opening at the hinge and the limb zone and the opening at the LP fault. And without getting too technical about it, it's a bigger opening. LP fault is just a bigger opening than the axial plane of the folds over at the hinge zone, for example. And when you look at how that mineralization may have moved throughout this system. The fluids came from very deep. The LP fault does tell us that the mineralization is very deep, and that the source of the fluids came from really, really deep down and moved up into the sequence. And as those fluids move up into the sequence, they're looking for opportunities. They're looking for changes in rock type, changes in chemistry, traps, some sort of a trap to find fluid movement. And I realize this is probably choppy for some, depending on your internet connection on the other side. So I'm just pausing a little bit to allow some of the animation to work here.
Well, Bob, I'll chime in for a second. I hate interrupting, but how big is that LP fault zone in, like, say, the section that you've cut here is probably towards the middle of the project, like that red area that you're looking at mineralization. I mean, what are you looking at for the envelope, basically?
The width of the zone there is probably, of the alteration and the footprint of mineralization, is up to 200 or 300 meters wide. At the widest, it's about 500 meters wide in here. The alteration zone, that is. The gold mineralization is concentrated in a tighter envelope than that. But that's the character of the LP fault. What is the LP fault was the original question I asked a few slides ago. It's a big alteration system. It's a big fluid conduit, and it's associated with quartz-sericite alteration. It's associated with albite replacement zones. It's associated with silicification. And that alteration envelope is much wider than the gold zone. And again, that when you look at big systems around the world, you're looking for big footprints. And that's one of the footprints of the LP fault system. Compare that to the hinge and the limb zone, where at the hinge zone, we might see a meter or 2 meters of alteration as we approach these really, really high grade quartz veins. The LP fault, once we're in it, we're in it. We're in it for hundreds of meters of alteration. And then we start to see development of higher grades and mid to low grades developing around those high grade zones. And just to continue with the model here, just to show the difference between the hinge and the limb again, in terms of how we've drilled these things. The limb zone, we've drilled it down to about 780 meters vertical. There's still a significant gap in there in drilling that we have to fill in. Vertically below the LP fault zone, we've only really gone down to about 400 meters. And it's still wide open here. Though, again, we suspect that the fluid movement is still occurring, and it's occurring at depth still. And just to give you a reference point here of where, at least in Red Lake on the left-hand side, the depth of the high-grade zone at this scale, roughly at this scale, is sort of about this data point here, where the high-grade zone was discovered and ultimately mined out. The depth of mineralization, as another example over at Hemlo, the projected underground proposal up to 2021 is about this depth. The open pit depth is actually in the top 350 meters, and that's obviously because you can't make a deeper pit than that. But just as a reference point of how deep these systems can become, this is very typical of mesothermal vein systems on the left-hand side, where the deeper you go, the better things get. Obviously, that's always the story, and it's been proven at the Red Lake mine. We've just barely scratched the surface on that side of things.
I think as well, the image on the left there of the cross-section through the Red Lake gold mine, that pretty much sums up what we thought we were going to see when we started to drill. And then you began generating this sort of exceptional continuity. So if you think about that cross-section, that was beside the other image, you can see that it's basically the narrow gold veining, and it's discontinuous and cuts across different types of geology. What you're showing at the LP fault, Bob, I mean, it is very predictable.
It is, and again, I want to emphasize the big scale picture. The coarse geology reveals the big structure. What is the LP fault? It's this big structure that crosses the property, and you can see it clearly in geophysics. It's why we staked the property when we did in prior to discovery. We saw this big feature crossing the property, and we wanted to grab as much of it as we could. But what's interesting is the details. Once you start to drill into this thing and you start to understand it, we started to build a very, very complex geological model from a very simple regional geological picture. And we've now identified rocks that are consistent in orientation for approximately 9 kilometers of strike length now. We see geological relationships, we see contact relationships, and we see the same stratigraphy over and over again. And this work is started by hand in the core shack, and you know, we still use crayons, and people still draw the cross sections by hand as they're drilling them. They obviously use computers to their advantage whenever they need to, but the geologists in the field put together detailed cross sections. We then take those cross sections, we put them into our model, and we try to predict. And we like every geoscientist in the industry, we all draw our cartoons and we all have our ideas. And then we set out to prove them with drilling. And the nice thing about this project is the proof has always been in the drilling, and it's always backed up what we believed were the reasons why the geology is the way it is, and the reasons for the gold mineralization as well. So these next few slides are going to walk through some of the rock types, just in general. You know, it's not a geological presentation unless I talk about rocks. And so I just wanted to go through some of the rocks that we've identified along strike of this. It is a layered sequence of rocks that are tilted up on end. There are folds identified in the hinge and limb areas, and there's a consistent orientation of fabric. We have thousands of oriented core measurements to back up some of the rocks, the units and the correlations that we've made here. So these are some of the rocks over at the hinge zone. These are folded mafic volcanic rocks. They host the quartz veins, which host the gold mineralization over at the hinge and the limb zones. The limb zone is slightly different in that it occurs at a contact between two mafic volcanic rocks. We have these high iron tholeiitic basalts and high magnesium basalts. And oftentimes that contact between those two, which is this point right here in the hand specimen, is occupied sometimes by sediments, sometimes by quartz veining. And it's very, very high grade when it's quartz veining, and when it's sediments, it has a moderate grade to it. But it certainly is a real target, and is something that we're looking at and going after. The recognition of the ultramafic on the property, this was first recognized by us a couple of years ago in outcrop, and then we of course started drilling. We went through historical core, and we relogged and resampled some of the original core, and now we found a very consistent ultramafic unit. It's an important unit because it occurs very close to the gold mineralization at the mines in Red Lake, as well as it's a sign of going back to that big picture geology that the Dixie Greenstone Belt is unique, because these ultramafics, they generally do not occur in the younger Confederation sequence. When we started to drill the LP fault, we started to drill into this marker sequence. And this is a metasedimentary, arguably volcanic marker sequence that looks exactly the same everywhere we've drilled it. We've drilled it now along strike for just over 9 kilometers in places. It always looks altered. It has these fragments in it. The core is quite remarkable. It has a very unique geochemical signature as well, and it forms kind of the contact between the mafic rocks to the left on the image and the felsic rocks on the right side of the image. It's a very consistent unit. It does help us to shut down drill holes and to let us know where we are in the sequence. The metasedimentary host rocks, these occur parallel to the felsic volcanic rocks. They in part are host to some of our high grade mineralization, but it's the contact between these felsic volcanic, these metasedimentary rocks and the felsic volcanic rocks. That contact is critical for localizing high grade mineralization, as well as just the overall bulk envelope of mineralization. In this view here, you can see the drill hole traces, those yellow and red colors in here. They represent the felsic volcanic primary host rock. This hosts almost all of the mineralization in the LP. These are flows, intrusives, pyroclastic phases, and they're generally mappable for several kilometers. Where they're thickest in the LP fault system is where we have our thickest mineralization so far to date. It's why we focused in on this central part of the project, is because those host rocks are the best host, and they also are they're thickest here in the middle of the property. On the north side of those rocks, we have this felsic intrusive that intrudes into the metasediments and pyroclastic rocks, and is generally unmineralized. Again, it gives us a rock on the other side that allows us to shut drill holes down on that side. When we drill through from this side through to this side, we have one rock over here that helps us define the edge. We have another rock on this side that helps us define the edge. And it just gives us the ability to find the zone in the middle. What's interesting is once you get out of the blue rocks, you get into the yellow and gray, you always have gold mineralization in the samples. Once you get out the other side, it tends to get a little bit noisy. You'll have some sporadic gold around, but it'll get a little noisy. And I'll show you more of what that gold distribution looks like as we drill down into the mineralization model. Now, the detailed geology obviously helps us to develop a detailed mineralization model. And for those that aren't familiar with them, the mineralization model and the geological model are both used to calculate a resource estimate. If you just use a mineralization model, you're only relying on assays, gold assays, and the continuity of those gold assays is geostatistically determined. If you have a geological model and you combine that with your mineralization model, the geology helps to predict the distribution of gold mineralization. And that's what we've been doing for the last probably 4 or 5 months, is we've been using the geological model to predict where we believe the mineralization is going to occur. And then from that, we've built these models, overlapping models of gold and of geology. And just if you stand back and you sort of ignore everything I've been saying and you just drew lines around the mineralization envelopes, they absolutely parallel these favorable host rocks, these felsic volcanic rocks, and the marker sequence. And over at the hinge and the limb, they follow the zones at the limb, and then they follow this hinge domain. Yes, there's noise outside of the hinge and limb zones, but these are generally just they're low-grade samples that occur whenever there's a vein around, whenever there's a random quartz vein. Sometimes they line up nicely with each other. Other times they're just random veins in the district. And this is a phenomena around Red Lake where you can drill holes out and you can always find 0.5 gram or 0.1 grams or 0.2 grams. The difference at the LP here is this stratigraphic host rock, this felsic volcanic rock, is always mineralized. And that's the theme that we've carried along strike as well as along depth. On the right side is just a cross section through that, where you can see that the vertical continuity matches the lateral continuity along strike. And we're going to look at both of these scenarios over the next several slides, starting with the plan view. In plan view, we've interpreted 2 zones of mineralization. These red zones are the bulk mineralization, and the magenta zones are the higher grade corridors within the LP fault zone. And the overall size of the mineralization model right now is about 7.5 kilometers, but it's very sparsely drilled along the edges, 200+ meter centers on the east side, and very sparsely drilled on the west side. Really that central corridor is where we've been focusing most of our work. Before we jump into the LP, we're just going to look at a little bit of the mineralization at the hinge and the limb zone. And the limb zones, the footprint of mineralization here is about 1 kilometer long at the hinge zone and at the limb zones. And we're looking at all gold intercepts on the property here. When I rotate this view here, you'll see a little bit of a better example of some of the higher grade mineralization and how these 2 zones are related to each other. They both dip the same way. They both dip ultimately towards the LP fault at significant depths, 3+ kilometers. They'll probably meet each other down there. But it does tell us something about, going back to the fluid flow, that they're probably related. And it's just some of the numbers that we've been able to pull out of the hinge and the limb zone over time. Our deepest hole that we've drilled into this system right now is BR85, is an extension of one of the LP holes. That hit this 10 grams over 19 meters. There's a lot of room here still between that intercept and above to fill in. And obviously now that we have one of our highest grade intercepts at depth, we obviously want to go look deeper and start to follow that up deeper as well. When we go back and look at the LP fault in comparison, we see this again, large area, almost 4.2 kilometers of area that we focused on with our regional, with our most of our drilling over the last few months, where we've identified these higher grade corridors within this overall bulk envelope of mineralization. You'll see that we haven't included a lot of this noise into the bulk envelope of mineralization because they don't meet the criteria. These samples out here are little veins, little quartz veins, oftentimes just a little hit within a sea of absolutely dead host rocks around it. They don't meet the criteria, which is it has to have consistent grade over several samples in order to be, and it has to be in the right host rock. It's not enough to just have a gold sample and say, you know what, this gold sample probably lines up with this gold sample. Let's go and drill 20 holes in here. Well, no, if this is the wrong geology and this is a different geology, you know, this is geology B, this is geology A, that doesn't present a drill target for us because it doesn't have a consistency that we can geologically follow. Whereas these red zones do. The red zones follow geology, they follow structural orientations. The purple zones follow structural orientations, they follow geology, and they've been drill tested. And we will continue over the next year to continue drill testing these and targeting them. Some of them will disappear in places where we drilled them. Some of these purple spots may get erased. We may extend them out into other areas. But right now we see very consistent grades across some of these things here. And we're looking at an area of about 900 meters, about 1.1 kilometers out to this individual hole here, where we have these, you know, 13 grams over 8 meters, 10 grams over 17 meters, and on the southeast side here, 48 grams over 8.7 meters. These are very consistent. These purple zones have a very consistent high grade to them, and their widths vary from a few meters up to 5 to 10 meters in places, but they're always very consistent. They always occur at a contact. In general, these purple zones here have generally greater than 10 gram intervals inside of them. And so that sort of draws the scale of them. They go for several hundreds of meters. And so far we've traced them to a vertical depth of about 400 meters.
Now, Bob, I'll interject here because there's going to be people on the call that have been following the news closely. And we'll remember that we've, one of our news releases, we talked about 2 of these high grade panels. But when you're looking at the model that you've developed now, I think what we're seeing is a number of these high grade panels, correct?
Yeah, there's a number of them, and we'll see more of them in the next few slides up, where I get out of the flippy rotating transitions and get into some more of the grade distribution along these panels. But it is, we started with 2. I think we started with 0, and then we drilled 1, and then we added more. And as we continue to drill this, we're starting to see a network of these develop. And this is just a summary slide showing the lower limit of drilling and how far we've actually drilled this. You can see there's intercepts outside of what we call the lower limit, but it's because those intercepts are outside of the favorable corridor. So let's just take a look now at some of that mineralization at various cutoff grades. And so this is just drill hole sample cutoff grade. And these are all samples across the property with greater than 10 grams per ton. And here's where you can see some of these high grade domains. And this is a network of structures that we've identified in outcrop. We've identified them through oriented core data, and we've drilled them. We've tested them and we've drilled them. And some of the intersections of these structures are very well mineralized, whereas others form a sheet of mineralization. You can see them here and you can see them here. And as in our early news releases, we had alluded to a couple of these. What we've learned is that there's more and more of them. The more we drill this, the more we're starting to understand them, and we're starting to realize what they are and how they relate to each other. Some of them follow geology, and some of them are cross-cutting structures. And the fabric that we're following here is a reasonable fabric. It's something that's documented in our database as well. When you zoom out, when you add the greater than 5 gram per ton footprint of samples, what you start to see is we fill in some of those structures. We add more data points to some of those linear planar features, but we also add noise. We add a lot of 5 gram per ton noise outside of those higher grade corridors. That 4.2 kilometer footprint increases to 4.5 kilometers with greater than 1 gram per ton samples. And here now you're starting to see everything inside of the red zone start to fill in. And again, there's flyers, there's noisy 1 gram samples all around this thing that they don't meet the criteria. They don't qualify as samples that we would include into our red boundary because they're the wrong geology or the wrong style of mineralization, or the oriented core data we obtained from that particular sample is going a different direction and doesn't fit with the model that we've established so far. So there's lots of reasons to exclude all these outside samples. When we look at greater than 0.5 gram per ton, all we're doing is filling in more. We're adding a lot more data points into the red zones. We do start to see a lot more noise at the hinge and the limb here again. But again, those samples, I'll point out again, they don't meet the criteria for being able to join them back. And there's two ways they don't meet the criteria. One is they don't have the right geology. Two is we may have drill tested them. We may have assumed that there was a pattern and we've put a hole between them and we didn't hit anything, which is very typical of red lake systems where you'll have a vein, you'll follow it above and below, maybe 10 or 20 meter separation, and you won't hit it at all. So our criteria here is we have to be able to hit the geology, we have to be able to reproduce the vein mineralization, and then of course the grade has to follow that as well. And when you expand out to greater than 0.1 grams per ton, this is all of the samples on the property. It's a low number, but essentially once we're into the favorable felsic rocks, everything is mineralized. And you can see some of these drill holes are mineralized from top to bottom, and there's little gaps sometimes inside of them. But in general, they point out this really large footprint of gold mineralization that isn't really normal in these types of systems. Normally, you know what we would consider normal in these types of systems in Red Lake is something like this, where you'll have a couple of holes, they'll have some noisy veins in them, and you may go through and drill some holes in between, and you may hit it, you may not hit it. And that's sort of a normal vein type of a system, whereas this disseminated gold system, we've yet to miss inside. We obviously have to put more holes in, and we will. But you know, there's just looking at this area alone here, there's about 10 holes in here that have all hit. To put one in between them now would be unreasonable to think that it's not going to hit, but we obviously need to prove that going forward. We've looked at it in plan view. Now we're just going to look at a couple of selective cross sections through the zone, and we're going to look at assay distribution of some of these samples as we go deeper and deeper into the section here. And the core photos here are they're just representative samples of some of the visible gold mineralization. And from a compliance point of view, obviously they don't represent what the mineralization will look like, and they're not indicative of mineralization on the property. They're just examples of some of the higher grade samples and what they look like. And what I want to emphasize, 2 points I want to emphasize as we look at these sections here. One is the grade distribution. We have, you know, in the example on the left here on section 20600, we have 583 grams, 0.8 grams, 141, 0.9, 5, 533, 49. It's a very consistent zone of mineralization over almost 7 meters there on that side. On the right-hand side, we have a tight zone of about 1.5 meters here that has 99, 46, and 159 grams in back-to-back samples. And then there's a disseminated envelope of mineralization where there's 1, 5, 1, 1, 1, 3, 2, 3, 2, 1. I'm just reading those numbers off, grams per ton, sitting in the footwall side of it. And this is where the LP fault, the distribution of gold at the LP fault is unique. It's not just one little vein here that carries all of the grade that then gets spread into other areas. They're actually domains of higher grade mineralization, and there's low grade envelopes around them. When we jump down,
I'm sorry, Bob, what was the depth of those intercepts that you showed on the previous slide? When did they begin?
Oh, these are down at about 70 meters vertical here.
Okay, thanks.
And the distance between these two cross sections is 550 meters across the LP fault here. Jumping down another level of depth here to about 150 meters vertical. Again, we see great grade distribution on the left-hand side. We see 2 distinct zones with higher grade mineralization in them, with an envelope of some lower grade mineral, and there's some dead rock in there too. You know, there's stuff in here that would do. This would not make our criteria for averaging. We wouldn't be able to average through all of this and include it in one intercept, for example. This would be 2 separate intercepts. In our news release disclosures, we you know, it wouldn't fit our rules. So we need to figure out why this area didn't hit, and we drill more holes, and we get a better understanding of that geology. On the right-hand side, there's a much more continuous zone here of probably about 8 meters of mineralization with some very, very high grades in it. And again, these aren't individual quartz veins. The photo here shows you this is disseminated gold, high-grade gold sitting in felsic volcanic host rocks, and in this case, metasedimentary host rocks, where there isn't just a singular vein that's carrying all of the grade. It's actually quite widespread and very consistent grade as well. Jumping down to the next panel, again, on the left-hand side, in that cross-section, we see those two zones developing again in the next drill hole. And the spacing of those drill holes on the left-hand side, those holes are about 100 meters apart. And on the right-hand side, we've drilled them just a little bit tighter. We're down to about 30 meters separation between those holes. But again, we see this element of having multiple zones of higher grade mineralization with very consistent grade within them, and then lower grade envelopes around them. And we obviously assay everything and we sample everything here as well. Jumping down another level, we're down at about almost 300 meters vertical on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, just a little bit shallower. And again, we see nice consistent grade. We see consistent assay results from these intercepts. The bottom intercept here would be about 10 meters across all the way through to that higher grade at the bottom. And on the left side, it's a little bit tighter now, but we still have high grade in here, and we still have an envelope of lower grade mineralization. The lower grade becomes less and less important at depth. We want the high grade continuity to follow at depth. The low grade, obviously, in a bulk situation, won't be as impactful in any mining scenario. Jumping down another level here on the right-hand side, we have 3 more drill holes there that have grade distribution in them, some mid-grade, some high-grade, some sporadic high-grade in the bottom hole here, but we still have that envelope of lower-grade mineralization here. The left-hand section is untested at that depth. And again, it just goes to show with the statistics that Chris had showed earlier, the number of holes we've drilled, the number of meters we've drilled, we still have a long way to go to fill in some of these cross sections, even in the highest grades that we have. Here's one of our deeper intercepts here. We still have this 71 gram sample in the middle, and we still have an envelope of lower grade mineralization. Here's just over an ounce. Again, that high grade continuity at depth is going to be really, really important for the future development of the project. So we're going to be looking at deeper and deeper holes as we go through here, looking for that high grade mineralization. And just to summarize again what these cross sections look like, we have our zone up in the top left, the LP fault zone, the limb zone, and the hinge zone, and 2 or 3 cross sections through this zone kind of shows you what the distribution of gold looks like. At the hinge and the limb, the middle section here, you can see those discrete vein zones of the hinge and the limb zone. Those are what will become ultimately the model for any resource work on that side. We're not taking all of the low grade here and creating a shape out of it, for example. We're not using all of these dots over here to influence the width and the size of the hinge zone because they don't meet our criteria. They're not consistent geology. They're not traceable. You can't drill underneath them and follow them, but you can, within these higher grade domains, you can follow that mineralization. Contrast that to the LP, where you have this thick zone of mineralization, which is geologically consistent and always has gold in it. And then some places really high grade gold in it. The depth of drilling and in our long section disclosures that we've put out in our news releases, you'll see oftentimes, because that section looks at everything from this side, you'll see intercepts below the zone, which appear to be below the zone, but they're actually not. The center of the zone is here, and we've drilled very few holes under the center because we have to logistically start drilling over here. And by the time you get through the zone, you know, the holes get deeper and deeper and deeper. So we haven't really gone deep on some of these. Just again, another point of contrast here is have a look at the drill spacing at the hinge and the limb zone here. These are typical Red Lake style systems where you have to drill these on less than 20 meter centers, 20 to 50 meter centers when we started, down to sometimes even 12.5 meter centers, arguably at the development stage at the mines, down to 2 to 3 meter centers. At the LP fault here, we're still on 75 to 100 meter drill centers here. And just to give you an idea of the scale, the difference in scale between those two zones. Just quickly to go through again some of the photographs of the gold mineralization, and you know, the reason to do this is obviously these are nice photos. There's lots of good gold shots in here, but we want to emphasize the difference between the LP system and the hinge and the limb system. The LP system is associated with gold mineralization disseminated in the wall rock. We have these high strain zones. We have corridors, structural corridors that will have higher grade mineralization within them. Here you can see the gold is recrystallized and following foliation fabrics. Moving along the LP fault zone, this is an image of gold in a metasedimentary host rock, and those circles are all visible gold. Again, no veins. There are some vein zones in here. We have broken vein zones as well. We have a lot of gold in the LP system that is associated with quartz veins, but they're not classic quartz veins in the sense of the hinge or the limb or a Red Lake system, and I'll show you the difference here in a second. This was our discovery hole. The first hole we had drilled into the LP system. This sample ran over 700 grams per ton. And you can see here how the gold is clearly recrystallized and overprinting almost some of the fabric that's in here. These bits and pieces of broken quartz are actually remnants of quartz veins. So they probably were here early in the phase development of this system. They were later reworked, crushed, moved around, and the gold has been recrystallized. And that's probably why our assumption of this gold being continuous, it's probably why it is so continuous at the LP system, because it's been reworked and remobilized at a subsequent stage. Just another example of some of the more silicified and albatized rock here. There's still quartz veins. There's a quartz vein right here, and the gold is just sitting in the wall rock. This is probably one of our best examples of foliation parallel gold mineralization here, again in a metasedimentary rock. This is at the contact between the felsic host and the metasedimentary host rocks. Now contrast that to the vein system. This is the new discovery at the Arrow Zone. It's a quartz vein with gold in it, and it's really that easy to explain. The deep Dixie limb, another quartz vein with gold in it. And the hinge zone, a quartz vein with gold in it. Here you can actually see some red-brown biotite alteration, some actinolite as well, hydrothermal alteration that sits well within the model of a mesothermal type of vein system, but definitely nothing like the LP system. Just to summarize where we're headed with our programs here, going forward, we're going to be obviously drilling the hinge and the limb at depth. We're going to follow up that intercept that was in hole 85 and just continue moving up and down plunge of that intercept and filling in gaps. Right now there's a 400-meter gap between that high-grade intercept in hole 85 and the rest of the mineralization. Same with the hinge. The nice thing about these targets, they're so close to each other, we can drill them both with the same drill hole. At the LP fault in the near surface, we're going to continue to infill on less than 75-meter centers to get continuity, confirm continuity of higher grades, and also to start to build that near surface geological model, mineralization model. Deeper down, we're getting into the LP fault system here. We're going to see deeper steps, testing plunges and targeting high-grade mineralization. We're not going to be going after 1 gram material, say below 400 meters. We're still going to assay everything, and it's probably still there, but we're looking for high grade. So we're going to start to step down diligently over the next year, targeting specific high-grade corridors. And then along strike of the this is the wrong label. Along strike of the LP system here, we still have very wide spacing, 200-meter centers, in some places 1 kilometer centers on drilling. We're going to start to infill, and we're going to start to develop more continuity of mineralization outside of that main sort of 4-kilometer central part of the LP system. And I'm just going to turn it back over to Chris and wrap with a few summary slides here, and Chris is going to close off with that.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. You got me excited. Sorry. It's just, it's amazing to see how far it's come. And like the implications for the red model that you're showing, like on the the picture that you have in front of you, if you look at the bottom left there, like the volume of mineralization that you're alluding to, I mean, it's very significant here. You know, I think about that in terms of the scale of something like Canadian Malartic, which is about, I think the pit there is about 3.5 kilometers long. So, you know, the fact that this is this large and contains that volume with that kind of grade distribution is absolutely astonishing. But I guess what I would part with is, again, there's an emerging analyst consensus, and I think Bob is showing you in the data why this is the case, that we're on to a tier 1 type discovery here. It certainly has that potential, and the more that we drill, the more it looks that way, and that's usually not what you see in this industry. Usually you get to a critical mass of drill holes and things start to fall apart. This is totally the opposite. The more we drill, the more it continues to hang together. So that by itself is going to set this discovery aside from many, many others in the business. But thinking about it, maybe the top right is a way to think about the value prospect there. Like Bob is showing you on one image. On the middle is our project with the Dixie limb and the hinge zone on the left. I know Arrow is there as well, and the LP fault zone on the right. But beside that, you're flanked by, you know, these major deposits, like the cross section that he's showing you there. I think he's got it worked out to about real scale, you know, approximately. So that's a section from the high grade zone at the main Red Lake mine. You can see that it's the little gold traces that we see on that image are not wide. These are narrow gold zones that go down for, you know, 2.5 kilometers. And the value of that was one of the most economic mines in the world for many years. So you're looking at that. That's maybe a way to think. You know, it shows you the kind of potential, the at-depth potential of something like the hinge and the limb. And I think maybe a way to think about the project value is, you know, other companies in the area have historically and are currently putting those kind of things into production. Right? These are valuable deposits. I have no doubt that the guys that are working on these in the Red Lake area are going to come out with a lot of gold over time as they go through the production cycle. They're very valuable. You know, you think about that. But for us, that is a satellite type system beside the one on the right. And, you know, we make the Hemlo comparison all the time because the core looks similar and the whole bit. Now, Hemlo is only, the economics there, I think, are centered around about an average of about 8 meters wide, of about 8 grams per ton, roughly. You know, so we're looking at a system here where the bulk potential of it at the Dixie LP fault is a lot better, in my view. And I think Bob is showing that with the data than you would have had at something like a Hemlo. And you're looking at a system which is, quite frankly, it's bigger in terms of the spatial footprint. I don't know how many ounces there are yet. We haven't finished the drilling. But side by side on that graphic, you've got two major gold systems, two types of gold systems, and they're sitting about 500 meters apart on our project. So I think the best way to describe Great Bear is really a unique value proposition in the industry. I don't think there's anything else like this in terms of a greenfield discovery that's been made over the last large number of years. And I think as that value continues to come in, I think our shareholders will do quite well. That's very much a forward-looking statement, but I think we have the hundreds of drill holes now to back it up. And I just envision in my mind, like looking at the model on the bottom left, when that fills in, you know, say we drill another 100 holes in it, another 200 holes in it, the volume of mineralization and the grade distribution is going to be very significant. So in the short term, what we're going to do is we're going to upload a verify model of this work that Bob has done. You should be able, within a number of days, to go online and you should be able to look at that and spin it around to your heart's content and look at the distribution of this gold for yourself. We would encourage anybody in the industry to do that because I think it's going to be quite informative. And, you know, with that, I think if anybody has time and they're still listening, I think we could open it up to a few questions as well.
Thanks, Chris. I'm just actually going to get you to share your camera because we've been looking at this screen. As Knox had mentioned earlier, there is an opportunity for analysts to ask questions. So Knox, if you could help me out, thanks Chris. If you could give me a hand here. The first question is from Kevin McKenzie from Canaccord. So if you could unmute Kevin.
Yeah, I'm doing that right now. There you should be live there, Kevin. Can you hear us?
He looks like he's still muted.
Sometimes it takes a second.
There we go. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Hi, Kevin.
Good. Yeah. So a few quick questions here. So one, when we're looking at these, I guess these polygons that you guys have drawn out here with the purple and the high grade and the red and the low grade, what grade is the purple? I mean, maybe I missed that.
I think I better leave that one to Bob.
Yeah, Kevin, they're generally the centroids of those purple shapes are generally 10-gram composites and higher. So minimum of 10-gram composites, and then as we infill those, some of those criteria may start to change. We may start to add in lower than that threshold, but the original drawing of those was based on 10 grams and higher.
Okay, great. And I think the last question I had is, are you guys getting a better understanding of the true widths on this system? I know there's some different orientations and morphologies here, but is there a broad range that you can give us?
I'm actually going to step in on that one. And yeah, definitely. I mean, you can see by the density of data that we have a very good idea. Unfortunately, from a news release perspective, it's a little bit hard to say that, we hit 4 different high grade zones and the true width of this one is X, of this one is Y, this one is Z. Bob, at what point in time do you think we'll have a synopsis where we can present that in a consistent way?
It comes down to the model itself. And the last slide that we showed, so the broad mineralization is almost near true width because of the drill direction and because of the dip of the actual broad zone. Whereas the high grade zone, some of them are parallel to the broad red boundaries and some of them are crossing it at about a 20-degree angle. So we have to develop the model with more detail before we can individually start pointing at true widths of some of the higher grades. The bulk grade mineralization is generally very close to true width. It's probably 90+% of true width, but the high grades we're still having to determine because of the angles. We need to individually determine those widths.
And I would add there, in no case are we drilling parallel to anything. We're drilling as close as we can get, practically to orthogonal, 90 degrees perpendicular. We're trying to minimize the difference between true width and reported width.
And maybe just one last one here. So I think one of the big takeaways that I'm getting from this presentation is you guys have been able to domain out these higher grade zones, and then from this lower grade shoulder. Can you comment on the way you're looking at top cuts, or is it too early to speculate on that?
Yeah, Kevin, it's Bob here. It's too early yet because we need to start, our drill spacing is too far apart. And so for those that are on the call that are technically savvy, there's geostatistical drill spacing that needs to, you need to fill in a box that your high grades are X meters away from each other in order to determine capping, whereas we have a geological continuity right now that we believe goes for several hundreds of meters. We need to infill inside of those purple zones to bring that geostatistical uncertainty in par with our geological certainty, if that answers the question.
Yeah, no, that's good. We just need some more drill results. I think that's everything for me for now, so I'll pass it over to the next individual.
Thanks, Kevin. So the next question is from Alex Hunchak from CIBC. I think Alex is just about to get unmuted. I think you should be.
Can you guys hear me?
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thanks, Alex.
Okay. Well, thanks a lot, guys, for running through this. It's always great to see the model like this. I just first up, going to ask, we haven't seen any metallurgical data from the LP fault yet, but you guys have some great results from the hinge zone. Can you talk about what the similarities and differences are between the hinge and the LP fault? And then maybe even if there is any differences between the higher grade subzones and the sort of broader envelope in terms of metallurgy?
Yeah,
Yep.
I'll take that here. Chris looks frozen on the screen there, unless you want to answer, Chris.
No, I was just saying, I think this one is better in your hands. It's free gold in most zones, but let's go into the details.
Yeah, that summarizes it up. We haven't selected samples or we're in the process of selecting samples for LP because of the variations in grades, the domains. We needed to have this geological model, started before we could start to select different grade ranges for the LP system. That being said, we've not seen in our petrography work on LP and our geochemistry, we've not seen any thing that would raise a red flag. For example, the hinge zone, in some of the work that we're doing in the metallurgy there's argillites and there's a little bit of graphite kicking around. It doesn't seem to have an impact. There's also pyrrhotite. It doesn't seem to have an impact on the recoveries over there, whereas the LP fault doesn't have any graphite of any kind. There's no arsenic. There is arsenic, but there's no antimony. There's no tellurium. We see most of the gold as recrystallized free gold, and so we don't suspect there will be any issues there. But we're still in the sample selection process.
Yeah, I'd caveat too, Alex. I think out of all the zones, as Bob alluded to, probably the Dixie limb will be the most complicated, but I'd still say it's pretty dead easy. So I can't see, based on all the petrographic work and all the core observations, Bob and the guys, they've made thousands and thousands and thousands of observations of free visible gold. I think it bodes very well for the recoveries in all the zones on the project.
Okay, perfect. Thanks for that.
Thanks, Alex. Chris, I'm just going to interrupt for a second. If you could just go ahead and share your screen to the last slide. You are frozen, so we'll give everyone something to look at there.
Okay.
Yeah. We can hear you all right, so that's not a problem. But yeah, if you just want to share the last screen, then that's great.
There you go.
All right. Alex, did you have any more questions?
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, there's one more, if possible here. So as the confidence is sort of improving with the model here, are you guys putting any more thought to upsizing the drill program? Like, I know you laid out a bit of a rough plan, but is there any consideration to sort of growing that next year?
Chris, did we lose you?
I think we have lost him.
Yeah, sorry, I'm kind of in and out, guys. Bob, maybe you could.
Sure. Yeah. No, the upsizing really is going to, at this point in time, the reason to upsize would be to take advantage of some winter drill conditions, to target some specific areas that we really wanted to target. But from a larger point of view, we obviously at a company level, we need to discuss, we have deep drill targets, we have shallow drill targets and things like that. I'll let Chris finish that thought off.
I'm sorry, I kind of missed the question. I'm sorry, could you repeat?
Are we upsizing the drill program?
It's certainly possible. We went through the effort of expanding our capacity in Red Lake. I think when we talk about upsizing it significantly, we probably send a chill of terror down the spine of some of the staff. But at the same time, they've prepared themselves so that we can do it. So I think I'm with Bob on this one, that it's certainly possible, and it might help to expedite certain phases of the drilling. So I'm certainly open to that idea.
Okay, no, that's great. So thanks a lot, guys.
Thanks, Alex. So the next question is from Stefan Iwanu from Cormark. We'll just give him a second to unmute.
I've unmuted you, Stefan. You should be good to go.
And Chris, if you want to try and share your screen again on that last slide, just in case we freeze.
Stefan, you need to unmute on your end.
Okay. Hi, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks, guys. Just wondering, obviously, just stepping back and looking at the LP fault from an even bigger regional potential. You mentioned, like, a lot of the success you've had so far seems to be on a dilational feature of the LP fault. Looking at that expansive strike extent that goes on for kilometers and kilometers and kilometers. Do you see any other sort of prospective dilational zones or jogs within the LP fault that might be like the next nexus of exploration, in the future?
Yeah, we do along, so we initially found this with geophysics. We looked at dilation zones, we drilled a few holes and we tested it. So there are other areas along, but the key so much isn't dilation zones. It's where's the LP fault going to be coincident with those thickening of stratigraphy and those dilations in the stratigraphy. So because the LP fault is such a broad feature, it doesn't show up well in a sort of a detailed, it's 300-400 meters wide in places. So we are looking regionally at other areas. This is one place along the strike of the LP where the greenstone belt is parallel to it. And so we have about 18 kilometers of greenstone parallel to that structure. So that's our regional targeting is looking at those larger features, larger dilations where we may have a structure crossing that. So we thought we were hoping it would be a lot simpler, but it certainly needs a few ingredients to make it work.
I'd also Yeah, Stefan, I'd also put in the caveat that I don't think there's any kind of limitation to the size from a deliverable perspective in the area that we're working on either. So, given the fact that we want to, our goal here again is, tier one type, resource in sort of record time at record capital efficiency. That sort of drives us to deploy the most of the drilling in this area. But again, I don't think there's any limitation on the area that we found. I think it's more than big enough to meet our
Oh, for
goal.
sure, yeah.
Yeah,
No,
yeah.
definitely you're gonna get your hands full for sure. And just maybe just a follow-up question, just on the resource itself. You mentioned in the presentation that you're kind of looking now towards the end of next year for that maiden resource, and I think originally we were maybe anticipating something closer to the middle of next year. Is that just a function of needing more drilling, not getting the drilling through quite as quickly as you'd like to with COVID and other things, or expanding the drilling? Like, can you just sort of give us an update as to where that stands and maybe why we're looking towards the end of next year now?
I think it's an abundance of caution, just in the sense that we are in the middle of a pandemic, and we did have to go from 5 rigs to 3 rigs earlier this year. We've managed to keep that productivity going, and so that's we've got back up to 5. I just think we'll get to that point where I think we'll be done drilling the program that we aim to do when we announced this last year. I think that's going to be done on time next year, kind of the middle of the year. But as we said, there is uncertainty in the marketplace, and of course we keep finding more gold as we go. So there might be, if you took another month and you wanted to add a lot more ounces in a short period of time, we'd rather do that than just kind of commit to an arbitrary deadline, right? I mean, Bob, do you have a different answer than that?
No, the only answer I would have that would be different is we need to establish limits to the zone. And so right now we haven't established those limits along strike or at depth. And so we don't want to get ahead of ourselves with a resource estimate. And then, these resources, you always have a cutoff date, and then you drill a hole the next day. So we want to make sure that we've done a reasonable effort in finding limits, establishing limits to the zone prior to committing to that study.
Yeah, that's a great answer, because in a sense, we're only drilling. If we think about delivering something based on 0 to 400 meters depth, that's literally just drilling the tip of the iceberg here.
Okay. So just maybe in terms of the way we should think of it then, resource aside, but just in terms of delivering the 300, give or take, holes, that's probably something towards the middle of next year we'll see then?
Well, that'll be done by then, and then I guess we start the reporting process and calculation process and all that. I mean, we're working on things as we go, but I think given the way the world is going, and the way that the project is coming together very, very nicely, I think we have some flexibility in delivery time there. Just for what Bob is saying, I think even if we gave Bob 5 years, I don't think he would actually drill the edges of the system. He would just keep drilling it, right? And it would keep expanding. So it's a bit of an arbitrary line in the sand to keep that in mind.
Definitely. Definitely. Thanks very much, guys. That's very helpful, and great to see the geology update.
Thanks.
Thanks, Stefan.
Yeah, thanks.
The next question is from David Talbot from 8 Capital. Thanks, David. Whenever you're ready to go.
Thank you all. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, I appreciate the call today. Very informative and helpful, and congrats on a great year. I wanted to drill down a little bit deeper on the strategy surrounding your resource estimate. Many clients understand the LP zone is going to get larger, but I think, seeing is believing here for some. In the absence of an estimate, they don't always believe our various mineral inventory estimates, and they value the stock, at this time, which might not necessarily be reflective of where you guys are going. Can you maybe suggest what you might want to message from your resource estimate due towards the end of next year? Are you looking for a high quality starter pit area to emphasize economics, perhaps wanting to drill down deep enough to show deeper high grade underground resources, make a case for long life? What's sort of the plan for the resource?
Those are great points, Dave, and it sounds like you might have earned a spot as part of Great Bear management. Yeah. I guess the answer is, I think what we're going to deliver would, in my mind, this is a forward-looking statement. The work is not done, but I think the economic implications of what we're going to provide will be pretty astonishing, in the sense that who else is drilling off that amount of high-grade gold mineralization that close to surface? I don't believe there are, much in the way of current parallels. So I think, if I look at it from our point of view as a company that wants to develop this project, right? Or you could even put the shoe on the other foot and think about a company that would be looking at buying it. Our goal is to build the company and develop the project, but regardless of that, you're going to want to see really good economics, a really fast payback period, and you're going to want to see, so fast payback, really good economics, shallow depths, all that stuff. And I think if we deliver those things, like I'm looking at, we won't get into any specifics, but you look around the market today and there's companies that are nearly the market capitalization of Great Bear based on a small number of drill holes or based on a small mine life and a small number of ounces, these kind of things. And this project is quite clearly very large. I don't know how big yet, none of us know. And it looks like it'll have really, really good characteristics in terms of what it can deliver on the economic side. So I think for your shareholders that are asking that, I would argue find a parallel to this, and find a parallel. If you look at a project that's a bit further down the road, you can value what we have based on how we should be valued based on other projects times X in terms of a multiplier for gold endowment once we get further down the highway. And I think that gives you a short-term way to really give metrics. And I think if I've read your reports over, Dave, and it's great. I mean, you don't need me to tell you it's great work. So I really point my finger at it as, being, a great way to look at the project as well. So I think in the meantime, think about the implications. I know it's a bit of a rambly answer, but say that, you had a 50-year mine life. Nobody in the world comes out with a mine life that long because nobody cares after, say, the first 10 years, roughly. So I think if you define something that looks really good and very short payback periods over, a very short period of time, and you have more than a 10-year mine life on top of that, I think you're going to be looking at the kind of deliverable that we're aiming to provide here.
Okay, thanks for that. So might you try to extend the core of the deposit, maybe around section 2600 to 700, 800 meters depth as well, and include that in the resource?
Yeah, Bob was alluding to the fact that what we're going to do is follow the high grade down. And I think what you'll get is an initial resource, again, from surface down to whatever meters it is, say 400, 500 meters. But when that comes out, there will already be drilling down deeper. So, from a valuation perspective, it should prove the case, as much as you can with these things in the shallow surface, but it'll already be clear that it's going to extend down and multiply by X factor of larger, right? So yes, very much so.
Okay, thanks. One other question, parallel zone potential here. I'm not going to ask you about that northern fault contact potential because it's a little bit further afield, but could you discuss a little bit what you're seeing in the footwall of the LP fault at the Mafic volcanic contact? You guys had a phenomenal drill intersection there late summer, I believe. Is this another parallel zone that has potential to be as extensive as the LP fault panels and the felsic rocks themselves? And do you have enough drill holes in this horizon, or might you need to deepen some of the existing LP fault holes?
Yeah, I'll let Bob answer most of that, but I can see that you notice there are very succinct linears in that drilling. That's something that I think requires more work, but maybe I'll let Bob talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, good question, David. One of the things we're learning about the high-grade domains inside the LP is that they extend outside of the LP. So the structural network that we've modeled based on higher strain domains, concentrations of higher vein zones, etc. We suspect that they extend outward from the favorable host rocks at the LP fault. And so you could think about, in a gross sense, you could think about the hinge and the limb being an extension of some of these structures that have come off of the main LP into different rock types, different hinge, mafic volcanic rocks and things. So we suspect that outside of the LP system that we will probably start to see, like the arrow zone, for example. It was called the arrow zone because we drew a line from the LP and from the hinge and the limb, and the three lines formed an arrow. And that's why we drilled the zone, and that's why we named it. But we suspect that there's going to be opportunities to find more of these vein systems, mafic hosted type of vein systems outside of the main LP. It's not to say we're not going to find another LP, but we also, in order to find another LP, we need to find that stratigraphy. And so far, south of the marker sequence, all we have are mafic volcanic rocks. So the potential in that area to find additional hinge type zones, we believe is very high, and we're going to be looking for those. And to that question about the North Fault, that's a contact between mafic and felsic rocks again. So it's not an LP type of a target, but certainly could be a hinge type of a target.
We do seem to see gold popping out at just about every change, significant or certain changes of geology. So for instance, there's rhyolite dikes that are parallel to the Dixie Limb Zone that have high-grade gold in cases popping out along the sides of them. That was some of the early core that Bob and I were looking at when we were out on the project. So yeah, it seems like these anisotropies, these structural preparations, and these changes in geology, there's a number of them at the project, and they all seem to be mineralization targets.
Okay, thank you, guys.
Thanks, David. And our next question is from Phil Kerr from PI Financial.
Phil, I've unmuted you. You should be able to talk. Hello, Phil.
Just give him a second.
Asked to unmute. Yeah, I know Phil was dialing in, so you might have technical difficulties here.
Yeah.
Yep, not there.
Okay.
Well,
Phil, if you see this and you're seeing it, just give me a shout afterwards, and I'm happy to chat.
yeah, so there's no further questions at this time, Chris. If you want to do closing with us, and then I can wrap it up.
Okay, well, just quite frankly, thank you for everybody listening in. I know it's been a very long call. Again, your time is valuable to us. We're happy to show the work that we're doing. We're obviously very proud of it, and we think it's going to be something that's very lucrative for shareholders. But at the same time, again, hats off to the technical team that have got us here. You guys know who you are. I was just out there in Red Lake talking to, say, like Terry, Ian, Crystal, Ricky, the other guys on site as well, the guys logging the core. Everybody's done a phenomenal job here. You're going to have a very busy 2021, and I continue to commend you for the high quality of the work. So thanks, shareholders, thanks, technical team, and I think 2021, I said this before, but in this case, 2021 is going to be the busiest year that we've seen so far.
Great. So ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our webinar today. The recording will be available on YouTube and on our website shortly when we can get that all wrapped up. And we thank you for participating. If you do have any questions, like always, please give us a call, 604-646-8354, or you can email us at info@greatbearresources.ca. And I would just ask that you just disconnect your lines, and thank you very much for your time. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Bob.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everyone.
Analyst.
Bye now.